Hi, everybody. I'm really happy to be here with all of you at the Emergency Learning Workshop. Basically, it's an emergency in the situation that we're in right now, trying to figure out how we can teach remotely and be really effective and not work so hard. So, one of my methods is basically written on the first slide. It's giving kids control of their learning. If you give them more control of their learning, you don't work as hard and they learn more. So I'm going to talk a little bit about this today. So I will talk a little bit first about me as a teacher. So I've been a teacher for about 40 years, long time. And I'm also an author. I wrote two books. One is called Moonshots in Education, came out in 2015, and it seems to have been pretty well received. And then I wrote a second book, came out in 2019, and it was called How to Raise Successful People, Simple Lessons for Radical Results. And that was actually a pretty big success. It's published in 22 languages around the world, and it's been a bestseller in the United States. And I target parents, teachers, and basically business managers because I think the same sort of philosophy works for all three. I also target relationships, personal relationships, and it also works really well in your personal relationship. So I'll talk a little bit more about that in the talk. I've also been a speaker all over the world. I'm a parenting expert. I think it's based on my three kids. And then I'm an entrepreneur. I just started a company with my former student, Ari Memoir, and the name of the company is tracked.app. And I'll tell you a little bit about that as well. So I think changing the culture of the classroom is really the key to changing the way we teach. The culture is really probably the stumbling block. But right now the system remains the same because it's very, very hard to change culture. And as we know, culture exists for centuries. And one of the hardest groups of all to change is the education system. So we've been teaching like this for more than 100 years. And everybody says, well, why should we change? It seems to have worked. So why should we change anything? But actually, the world has changed dramatically because how we learn has changed. We now learn primarily online, and especially this has been propelled by the pandemic, but it's not going to go away anytime soon, unfortunately. So we need to change the way we teach. However, the teacher is still in control, and this is in an in-person class. All interaction goes through the teacher, and this is through a Zoom class. All interaction goes through the teacher. And the majority of those classes, I said about 60%, that's a statistic I got. But I wonder if it isn't more. I wonder if most teachers aren't in control totally. And then that creates more work for the teacher, and it makes it less engaging for the student. So a typical class looks kind of like this. And you never know. It's hard for you as a teacher to figure out like who's paying attention, who isn't paying attention, what do they want to know, what don't they want to know. And you have 60 minutes, and it's hard to figure out what those kids are doing, thinking, learning, whatever, in a 60-minute Zoom call. So I feel sorry for the teacher, of course, since I'm a teacher, and but also feel sorry for the kids because they're trapped in a situation that's really difficult. And I think we're all in this situation. We don't know how to do it. And so this is probably why Steve Hargadon came up with this emergency learning situation where he can help all of us. So as school moves online, many students stay logged out. This was in March, and not only April and May, and unfortunately it's still today. Students stay logged out for multiple reasons. One of the main reasons is a lot of kids don't have access. Some of them don't have computers. But more than that, most of them just don't want to go online. Or if they're online, they don't pay any attention. And that's a really bad thing for everybody. It's bad for the kids, bad for the teachers, bad for the system. And so here's a headline that just came out about education a couple days ago. And it's the coronavirus. Failing grades spike in Bay Area schools with distance learning, many falling behind with remote online instruction. And it's not because it's really the teacher's fault. It's the fault of the whole system. It's not the way that we should be teaching. And as I mentioned earlier, I'll talk a little bit more about it, but if you put kids in control, if you let them study parts of whatever it is you're studying or the topic of your class, you'll see that they are much more engaged when they have to take some responsibility and when they're in control. So the main thing that we're still asking kids to do is memorize. That's the majority. And if you just look at the AP tests, it's all memorization. As a matter of fact, since I've been involved in teaching for all the years, I know that, when the AP tests happen in May, the beginning of May, the kids, after that, they don't want to do anything. And then if you re-administer those tests just a month later, you'll see the majority of kids, if they got a 5, they'll get a 4 or a 3. They just don't remember what they memorized because memorization is not really learning. So also student mental health has significantly worsened during the pandemic. I guess that's no surprise to anybody. And that's something that we should really be concerned about. So we're still teaching for the last century. We're still teaching so that everybody obeys, and that's not exactly what we want. We're still teaching people to follow instructions. And we need to ask ourselves, is this really what we want to be teaching? So especially, here's an interesting quote from a very famous person I'm sure all of you know about, Albert Einstein, who says something that I think is incredible and it's just relevant to everything that we're doing today. We cannot solve our problems with the same thinking we used when we created them. So if we have problems today, if we have situations today, we cannot use the same solutions that we used when we created those problems. We need new thinking. We need innovation. And right now, we are still, as I said, teaching so that people follow instructions. So what we need to do is teach kids to be independent thinkers. And the pandemic gives us this opportunity because the pandemic has given us an opportunity. I mean, education has changed so dramatically and people don't know really what to do. So it's given us an opportunity. It's a crisis. And most people just don't know how to cope in this crisis. And so it is an opportunity to make a lot of change. And I think that's one thing that we can all say is a silver lining in the cloud, gives us the opportunity to change the way we teach. These are the top 10 skills that all employers want. This is a LinkedIn poll, and the top 10 skills for 2020. Number 1 is complex problem solving. So if you just think about it, you cannot do complex problem solving. You cannot be a critical thinker. You cannot be creative by reading a book about it. You can't be creative or think critically by watching me do it either. You can't manage people by watching me do it. I mean, it's great that you can watch me do it, but honestly, you don't learn how as long as you're watching somebody or you're reading books about it, or you're watching a television show about it, or a video about it. I mean, what you need to do is do it. You actually need to do it. People learn the most effectively when they're actually doing it. So if you just take a look at all those skills, they all require you to do it. It's hard for you to learn about anything as long as you are just reading about it. You know about it, but just because you know about it doesn't mean that you can do it. So the question is really, what can you do as a teacher to help encourage students to develop these skills? And it's really hard to develop them in a remote learning environment. But we need to be creative about it and figure out how we can do it because we can. And I've been working on it, and I'll give you some of my ideas as well. So one of the things is, how do we encourage engagement? I mean, engagement is so important, and we don't actually think about it as much as we perhaps should. But if kids are engaged, they learn. And there is a woman that did an incredible talk on the power of music in education and why music works so well. And it's because we memorize songs that we like. And in memorizing it, we learn. So, but why do we memorize those songs? And how does that help us learn? We memorize it because it's entertaining and it captures our entire attention, complete engagement. So, we memorize the ABCs, there's all kinds of little rhymes that people memorize and then remember things. And so I think what we need to do is think about what is it about our particular subject that's going to encourage engagement and encourage critical thinking and encourage independent thinking. These are the three things that are really important. And what can we as teachers do in this pandemic setup to encourage these? And my answer is that make the learning more self-directed. Give kids more control of their learning. There's something you want them to learn, instead of you lecturing about it, have them go online and find the information and then share it with their peers in those little breakout rooms. Self-directed learning has a lot of advantages. It's easier on the teacher and it's much more engaging for the student. So when you give kids control of their learning, they care more about it. And especially if you have them present, give them the responsibility of presenting information. They learn much better when they have to teach other kids about it or when they're doing a presentation than if they're just passively listening to you. Also, when they own the education, when they own the project, when it's their idea, they care a lot more about it. And it's just like if you own your car as opposed to renting it, you care a lot more about it. Whatever you own, you care about. So here's a graphic on what happens when students own their learning. And this came from A.J. Giuliani, who does the Genius Hour. He is a really smart guy in Philadelphia. And these are just some of the ideas. And it would be great if you went through this and realized that, number one, they learn to experiment. They learn to be ready for the global creative economy when they own their learning. I mean, when they go out into the real world, you're not there with them. So they have to learn to own their learning. They become better explorers. They learn project management. There are just so many skills that we want kids to have when they own their learning. So when they don't own their learning, they have no power. And honestly, you want them to feel empowered so they can control the future. So today's students have no power to shape anything because they don't control their learning at all. So this is a talk that I gave at Berkeley, University of California. It's a TEDx talk in which I'm talking about how students have no power to shape even their learning. We need independent thinkers, not people that follow the rules. We don't want to have a whole bunch of lambs, as you saw the picture. We want people that actually think intelligently, can carry on a good conversation, and can manage themselves, their lives really well. And I don't see a lot of that happening in the education world at the moment. We still are encouraging them to follow the rules. but hopefully I'm wrong. So here's an example of somebody that I admire very much, who was a total non-rule follower, Elon Musk. I mean, if you read the history of electric automobiles, you'll be shocked that, I mean, they were discovered decades ago, but it's only Elon that made it possible. So what kind of a student was Elon? What did he do in school? Well, if you read his biography or you read his mother's book, and I think the mother's book is called "You Have to Have a Plan." You've got to have a plan, by Mae Musk. And Elon was a really poor student. He wouldn't listen to anybody. He was totally self-directed, and it created a lot of problems. And at some points, he just literally dropped out. And his mother, who was a single mom, didn't really know what to do with him. So of course, when you're a single mom, the kid wins, right? So in this particular case, he won, got to do what he wanted to do. And of course, in this case, for the whole world, we're all happy because, came up with Tesla, which is not just a car company, but it's also an energy company, if you take a look at it carefully. So here's the epitome of somebody who is an independent thinker, Steve Jobs. As you can imagine, read his story in the history of Steve Jobs, and you will see that he was always an independent thinker. And of course, independent thinkers are not perfect students. That's just the way it is. And so if your students are not following instructions all the time, don't worry. Perhaps you can give them a project where they can then show their independence, something that they can work on that is important to them. So just imagine what the world would be like if we didn't have Steve Jobs, if we didn't have phones in our pockets, if we didn't have computers, if we didn't have the internet. In that case, I wouldn't be here talking to you, because Steve Jobs is really the one who envisioned this and brought it to all of us. So Ken Robinson, famous education philosopher who unfortunately died this past year, one of my favorite people, he said, "We are educating people out of their creative capacities. I believe this passionately. We don't grow into creativity, we grow out of it. Or rather, we get educated out of it." I believe this is 100% true. So now, in the pandemic, this is an emergency. Let's give kids an opportunity to be more creative. Perhaps they don't have to memorize as much. Perhaps they could work on projects that embed the learning instead of memorizing the learning. Perhaps there's ways that you could put the kids in charge of the Zoom call instead of you being in charge of the Zoom call. I'm just talking about, maybe every other session or maybe part of the session. There are lots of different things that we can do to make school more creative. And it looks like we're going to be teaching like this at least for 6 more months, maybe longer. And if that's the case, we need to take steps to make our lives as teachers better, as well as making the lives of kids better. All my friends that are teachers, we're all stressed out. I mean, it's so much harder to be a teacher online than it is to be a teacher in person. And, the question is why? I mean, that's probably the topic of another entire talk. I mean, the fact is, it just is harder. So let's see what we can do to give kids an opportunity to be creative. So students with self-direction tend to be more creative. If they're self-directed, that's what happens. It's an outcome of self-direction. So here's the book that I wrote, How to Raise Successful People, Simple Lessons for Radical Results. And my philosophy is change your parenting, change the world. But it's also change your teaching, change the world. And I have this acronym, TRICK, which stands for trust, respect, independence, collaboration, and kindness. And I believe that this is even more important in the pandemic. We need to trust our students. I know that they are acting untrustworthy in many cases, and respect their ideas, because honestly, we don't have a lot of choice. Monitoring them is impossible, and it's also stressful. So why don't we give them the opportunity to be trusted and respected, come up with ideas for how they want to learn the material, give them some independence, collaborate with them on the rules and when the tests are going to be and things that are relevant to the class, and treat them with kindness. Be kind. Be willing to understand that it's tough for all of us. I'm telling you, it's very effective. It's worked in my classes um, for all the years I've been teaching, which is 40 years. So yeah, I've been teaching for a long time. So the question is, a lot of people ask me, what is a successful person? Because I like how to raise successful people. So what is a successful person? And I think it's someone who feels empowered to follow their dreams, someone who feels supported enough and capable enough to have a dream and then to follow their dreams. That is success as far as I'm concerned. And of course, they have, you know, I'm talking about the basics in life. You should be able to have enough money for food, for clothing, for a place to live, for a car, for the basics. I don't equate success with having billions of dollars. I equate it with being empowered and being able to contribute to society and make the world a better place. So James Franco was my student, and this is what he said in my first book, Moonshots in Education. She showed me I could take my dreams as seriously as I wanted. He wanted to be an actor in grade 12, and I believed in him. And the question is, why not believe in him? It was his dream. I mean, some people would say, well, maybe you shouldn't believe in him because, after all, he was a very shy student, and how can a really shy person become an actor? But, it was his vision, and he wanted to do it so badly. I believe every child should have the opportunity to follow their dreams, and that you should help them as much as possible. And so that's what I did with James Franco. So someone who believes in themselves is successful. Most kids, by the way, don't believe in themselves. They believe that somebody has to tell them what to do. Successful people are not worried about what others think. They are worried about what they think. Successful people are people who have a sense of control of their lives at least 51% of the time. So when people feel out of control, when they feel that they have no hope and there is no control, that's when we have to worry about kids, because then they feel suicidal. So it's really important for kids to feel optimistic and that they have a sense of control. Someone who trusts and believes in themselves, who has self-respect. And by the way, testing in the pandemic creates a problem because it's hard to monitor the tests. And so what it does is it sets kids up for cheating. And when they cheat, they feel really bad about themselves. So perhaps we could think of alternative ways to test students, because testing encourages cheating. It's hard not to cheat. I mean, there are ways online using Google Forms where you don't, where it's harder to cheat. But who's to say the student doesn't have all kinds of notes around? It's really tough, I'm telling you. Yeah, I'm sure you know. So it makes kids feel really bad about themselves. So I would encourage peer-to-peer projects. Kids learn the most from each other. And I would give them self-directed learning time all the time. And this is examples of where they can get it. Learn at home is one with YouTube. And this is my model, Learn the Trick Way. trust, respect, independence, collaboration, and kindness. And I just launched this about 3 weeks ago. Actually, this is a company launched with my former students. And the CEO is my former student who graduated in 2006. And the goal of this is peer-to-peer learning, giving kids an opportunity to learn from kids just a little bit older than them, kids that they can model after, kids that they can respect. And you have to remember, the most impactful person in a kid's life is another kid who's just a little bit older. And so that's what we're trying to do with Tract, is to help kids learn in ways that are really engaging and fun and effective. And it fits into the 20% time. And I'm not sure I explained the 20% time, but this is what I suggested when school was back in session, or when it was in session. And actually, I'm suggesting it now when school is remote. 20% time, it says that 20% of the classroom time should be devoted to self-directed learning. And the other 80% of the time can be traditional teacher-directed learning. And so Tract fits into the 20% category. Kids can do it for an hour once a week. They can do it for an entire day, once every couple of weeks or whatever. They work with their peers. It encourages discovery. It's learning paths created by other students. So thank you so much for listening. I'm really excited that I was given this opportunity. And I encourage you to check out Tract, by the way. It's tract.app. And if you send me an email, you can send me an email if you are interested in knowing more at Woj, W-O-J, at tract.app. That's my email. Or you can send me a message on Twitter, Esther Wojcicki at Twitter. And I wish everybody a happy teaching year in spite of the pandemic. Hopefully we'll all get through this together.